Get a bucket and a mop for this wet ass.
P word.
Give me everything you got for this wet ass.
P word is female genitalia.
Certified freak. Hello, welcome. Hello, welcome to another episode of Oh My Menses. I am Corinda, your host. I'm a naturopath. I'm a fertility awareness educator and a menstrual cycle lover. Hormones are my favorite. Periods are my favorite. And here we are. The topic for today is demystifying discharge. And let me start off by saying how much I hate that word. I have such a deep hate for that word because, well, I feel like growing up, it was one of those words that fell into the category along with like moist and damp. Why do they all relate to fluid? But you know, those words that would give you the ick. We weren't calling it the ick at the time, but back in 2011, it was like, oh, those words that make you cringe, you know? Now, I don't like the word discharge because I feel like it does not do justice for the magic and the various fabulous fluids that are made within you that come out of your vagina. And when we call cervical fluid discharge or like anything we see in our underwear discharge, like I'm just like, look, we love an umbrella term. It makes things easier to understand, right? But no, not with this. I want to get specific. I want to demystify discharge and I want you to know exactly what is coming out of you at any given time. And that's what we're going to do today. We are going to break down the difference between cervical fluid, also known as cervical mucus. We're going to compare that to something called vaginal cell slough. I also don't like that word because my brain struggles to pronounce it. You could also pronounce it Slough, like that's how it's spelled, Slough or slough, as in cough. We're going to compare that to arousal fluid. We're going to compare that to female ejaculate, which I just found out was first described in ancient texts 2,000 years ago. Excuse me, who is she? And we're going to compare that to squirting. And we're also going to cover what you could notice if you have an infection. And we're also going to talk about a bonus thing that we might notice coming out of our vaginas, which is semen. Surprise! That's what we're going to cover today, so stick around if you want to hear about what those fluids are, why they are different from each other, where they are actually being made, and why they're coming out. I learnt some really interesting stuff, especially about the female ejaculate. I got some of my own personal myths busted on that one, so you're going to want to hear that. To start off with, before we dive into the fabulous fluids, let's do a cycle check-in. I invite you to do the same. Take a moment to identify where you are in your menstrual cycle, or if you don't have menstrual cycles at the moment, take note of where you are in whatever journey you're on. If you feel like you'd like a guidepost and that you really have no clue where your body's at the moment, you can use the lunar cycle. You can have a look at what phase the moon is currently in, and you may resonate with that energy. For me personally, I'm going to be totally real here. My phone is recording right now. I'm not going to stop the recording to look at my menstrual cycle tracking app. I don't know off the top of my head what day I'm on. Look at that. Menstrual cycle enthusiast doesn't know every single cycle day as she's experiencing that cycle day. But I do know I am past ovulation. I would say that I am roughly in the middle of my luteal phase, and I would say that I am on day 24, 25, 26. My vibe is, because, you know, it's one thing to check in, but also suss out, you know, reflect on how you're feeling physically, mentally, emotionally, energetically. My vibe, I'm feeling physically and emotionally grounded. I'm feeling focused. I have like a steady energy that's not like self-combusting. It's not the kind of like manic energy that I get around ovulation, but it's this really like calm, steady, consistent energy. It's really, really quite beautiful. I love ovulation, but I love this grounded feeling that I get in my luteal phase. Oh, it's the exhale. after the really, 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 really big inhale that can be ovulation sometimes. And for me, this cycle, it was a big ovulation. So I invite you to check in. If you would like to understand a bit more about the menstrual cycle to help your own cycle tracking journey and understand the different phases of the menstrual cycle, because there are 4 very distinct phases beyond just your period, you might like to download my free cycle tracking guide. When you download that guide, it's free, it's in the links below. You will join my Corinda's Corner community where you receive fortnightly emails from me with various naturopathic tips and personal stories and exclusive blogs, and I've even started doing vlogs now. So if that sounds like that might be up your alley, please help yourself. Links below. Okay, let's dive in. I want to challenge myself to see how efficient I can make this episode. And my regular listeners and viewers will probably be laughing because they know how much I can waffle on. Okay, first things first. We're going to be talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kinds of things that we can see coming out of our vaginas today. And the first thing I feel like I need to give the most voice to, because I feel like it is the most overlooked, the most misunderstood, and maybe one of the most vital markers. And it's cervical fluid, also known as cervical mucus. This is fluid that is specifically produced by cells in your cervix. Now, there's not just one kind of cervical cell. You have at least 4 different kinds of cervical cells. These cervical cells reside in something called cervical crypts. So if you will go on a visual journey with me right now and think about your womb, and sometimes I like to make like a triangle where my thumbs are touching and my 2 index fingers are touching, and my thumbs are at roughly my belly button and my index fingers are pointing down. They're like right over my pubic bone. In that triangle, roughly, will be where your uterus resides. And coming off and in front of your uterus will be your 2 ovaries. Now, in that uterus, the lower third is made up of your cervix. There is a cervical opening that is met through your vagina. And then the cervix is actually, it's not just this like, I don't even know how like mainstream relates to a cervix. Feel free to like comment below, like what do you think of or what do you imagine when you think about a cervix? But it's not just a little hole, and it's not just like a wall that sits at the top of your vagina or at the bottom of your uterus. It's a portal. It is a portal of sorts. And within this passageway, within this mystical in-between portal, taking us from the outside world through the vagina and into the voidal womb where life is gestated. Oh, exciting. It's pretty magical in there. There is a whole passageway, and off the walls of the cervix are these crypts, these little crevices where different cells reside, and these different cells respond to fluctuating estrogen levels to create different kinds of mucus. So cervical mucus isn't just one kind of mucus. Cervical mucus is mostly made up of water. It can contain up to 99% water. The water content gets higher the closer you are to ovulation, but it also contains a small amount of salts and sugars. There's some glycogen in there. The glycogen's purpose is to help fuel the sperm cells that may find themselves in your reproductive tract in an attempt to facilitate conception. So I've got 2 resources here today, and this episode is going to have a few different links because I found some excellent research while I was reading up on this. So check out the links in the show notes. I'm referencing Natural Contraception and Conception by Jessie Brebner. Highly, highly, highly recommend this book. It makes fertility awareness and understanding your menstrual cycle in a very biomedical way super digestible. Highly recommend. And I also have an old blog post that I found by someone called Darcy Black from 2021. And she just really articulates like the different kinds of mucus well. So there's 4 kinds of crypts in your cervix, 4 kinds of cells, and 4 kinds of mucus. There's mucus that responds to estrogen, which makes up 3 of the crypts. Then there's cells that respond to progesterone, which makes up 1 kind of crypt that is lower down in your cervix. So there's P crypts, S crypts, L crypts, and G crypts. Each of these crypts produce a specific kind of mucus that play a different role in our fertility. First, L mucus is produced by the L crypts at the beginning of our follicular phase. So this is closer to the start of your menstrual cycle, shortly after your bleed. Usually 3 to 5 days into your period is when your estrogen levels are going to start to be on the rise again. And that mucus helps dislodge the mucus that would have been blocking your cervix previously at the end of last cycle, which was produced by the G crypts. So they respond to the hormone progesterone, and that stimulates a thicker kind of mucus that forms a plug at the opening of your cervix to protect a potential pregnancy that has occurred, and also to block sperm from entering. And the cool thing about G mucus, when they've looked at it under a microscope, molecularly, it's like this web-like structure that sperm literally cannot penetrate. It creates this perfect barrier to prevent sperm and pathogens from getting into your cervix and into your uterus. So when you get your period and progesterone levels drop, that G mucus dissolves, but also with the slow rise of estrogen at the start of your cycle, L mucus also helps that G mucus dissolve as well, opening up the cervix once again for potential interactions with the outside world. So that L mucus also creates a supportive structure in the tissues, which is going to help with the S mucus that is coming shortly. It filters out sperm that are defective, that are not going to be good contenders for fertilizing one of your eggs. And crazy, this L mucus helps close some of the cervical crypts once they have sperm in them. I spoke about it in the last episode when I was talking about the fertile window, how sperm can survive in your reproductive tract for up to 5 days. How they do that is by meeting fertile quality cervical fluid, getting up into your cervix, and hibernating in specific cervical crypts, awaiting ovulation, waiting for one of your egg cells to be released from one of your ovaries. And there is a kind of mucus that is produced that helps those sperm hibernate, waiting for that perfect moment to be released closer to ovulation. You can't make this stuff up. This is actually incredible. So L mucus on its own has more of a thicker, pasty or creamy kind of texture. It will likely be opaque rather than transparent. There may be a tiny bit of stretch to it, but not much. And then the closer you get to ovulation, your S mucus starts to be produced by your S crypts. This kind of mucus is a lot more fluid-like, a lot more water content, and does tend to be translucent or see-through. These crypts are responding to higher levels of estrogen, which makes sense because your estrogen gets higher the closer you get to ovulation. When the S mucus combines with the L mucus, it creates a specific structure that creates these kind of like pathways between the molecules that supports and enables better sperm transport. Again, our bodies function in a way that supports fertility, that supports reproduction and continuing the human race. And mucus, different kinds of mucus interact with each other to create passageways to help sperm. Crazy. The final category of mucus is P-type mucus. Firstly, it helps that L-type mucus liquefy the G mucus that was forming the cervical plug. It does that at the beginning of our fertile window, so again, sort of mid-follicular phase. And it also helps sperm transport, sort of in that second phase of sperm transport, to get closer to our fallopian tubes through our uterus. So pee mucus is a lot more watery. When you have a higher ratio of this mucus compared to the other kinds of mucus, you will feel more of a slippery sensation at your vulva. You may feel this sensation just when you're walking around. You may feel this sensation when you wipe after going to the toilet. I find, especially after a bowel movement, more cervical fluid will come closer to the entrance at the vulva. And what's interesting, another function of cervical fluid in general is that it makes your vaginal environment slightly more alkaline. Now, generally, our vaginas are quite acidic. That is an immune kind of function. It helps keep our vaginal microbiome very healthy. The dominant lactobacillus species that thrives in our vagina and on our vulvas loves acid and is an acid-producing species. Acid helps keep pathogens out. It helps kill off sperm at times of our cycle when we're not fertile, when we're not close to ovulation. So the cervical mucus helps to make our environment more alkaline to actually help the sperm survive. So we change our environment temporarily for that fertile window just for the sake of sperm survival, and then we go back to a more acidic state. Wild. And just to reiterate, as I mentioned in the previous episode, when any kind of estrogenic cervical fluid is present, so those three types, the L, the P, and the S, if sperm makes contact with those kinds of mucus, sperm cells will be able to survive for up to 5 days. And that is what opens and sets most of your fertile window. Amazing. Our bodies are freaking amazing. And interestingly, something I learned that I didn't know, when you're closer to ovulation and it's more of that P and S mucus at play, you can have 30 times more cervical fluid than you would compared to other times in your cycle when you're not close to ovulation. I thought that was very fascinating. So you can produce a lot of it. You may notice this in your underwear, on toilet paper, and importantly, you may just feel the sensation without actually seeing any visible mucus. The sensation, when it comes to tracking cervical mucus, surprisingly, the sensation that you feel is actually more important than what you physically see. The second category of things that you may find coming out of your vagina is cell slough, vaginal cell slough. This refers to cells and moisture and just products of cellular replication as part of your vagina's and vulva's natural self-cleansing system. Your vagina is replenishing older cells all the time. It's growing a new mucosa all the time. The outer lining is made up of a lot of epithelial cells, and these shed just like other cells on our body. Like we get dandruff because there's a lot of cell production there and skin cells are being pushed to the surface. The same thing happens at your vulva and in your vagina, and this can produce cell slough. This, compared to cervical fluid, cell slough will be more tacky, pasty. It will easily dissipate if you touch it, compared to cervical mucus, which often won't easily be washed off or dissipated when you touch it or manipulate it. And I've also heard that in water, cell slough will again, easily dissolve, easily dissipate, whereas putting cervical mucus, especially a more fertile kind of cervical mucus, in water, it will stay as a glob. So in your underwear or on toilet paper, you may notice this vaginal cell slough as more of a drier kind of consistency. It might be more crumbly. It won't have a stretch to it. And as I said, it will dissipate when you touch or rub it. The other thing to note here is that you will get more of this cell turnover, the more moisture that is coming out of your vagina or present around your vagina. So with increased sweating or arousal fluid, there can be more cell turnover, and so you may notice more discharge in your underwear or when you wipe after going to the toilet. I'll include a link to a cervical mucus gallery where you can view the different kinds of cervical fluid and specifically different presentations of cell slough. Third kind of fluid is arousal fluid. This is one that I am passionate about for a lot of different reasons. And maybe the biggest reason is that I don't think we're paying enough attention, still It's 2025. There's so much information out there. And I feel like we're only just scratching the surface. We are just exploring the tip of the iceberg that is the realm of female anatomy and female pleasure. And I don't think most people are putting in enough effort to arouse female partners. And so I'm passionate about arousal fluid because in the right circumstances, with the right kind of stimulation, you can produce a lot of it, and it can make sex and even non-sex acts like just a lot more pleasurable. So arousal fluid comes from a pair of glands called Bartholin's glands. These glands are sort of lower down on your vulva, just sort of on the inside of your vaginal opening, quite close to the entrance. And what happens is when you're aroused, there is more blood flow to your vulva, your labia engorge, your clitoris engorges, and it's this engorgement of the tissues that presses on these glands and helps the arousal fluid coat the lining of your vagina to make things more easier, to add lubrication, to add more to increase sensation, and to overall increase pleasure. But obviously it contains a lot of functions for evolutionary purposes to aid the entering of a penis into a vagina, because again, DNA can't escape our biology. Arousal fluid compared to other fluids it's always going to be clear, and it's quite thin in consistency. I had a recent experience with a Bartholin cyst that came from, in my opinion, to put it bluntly, like I was aroused a lot for a short period of time, and I feel like a lot of fluid built up, and there may have been a blockage of the opening of the gland, and it just felt like a little kind of ball on the outside of one of my labia. And I actually took myself through a bit of a practice to help release it. And it was actually, the whole process was actually quite ceremonial and incredible. But I actually could feel it under my thumb, like releasing, and I could feel fluid like running down my vulva onto my perineum. And it wasn't even like a sexual act. I was just so fascinated and curious about how it was working and how easy it could release when I was just like present with it and just experimented with like different kinds of pressure and touching it from different angles. Yeah, very, very interesting process. If you've experienced a Bartholin cyst before, or if you're experiencing one now, I'm very happy to share more of my story. Please feel free to email me. The link to that is below. So arousal fluid is also going to dissipate easily, similar to cell slough. Once again, compared to cervical fluid, which tends to be the one that lasts and lingers the longest because it's just got more water content and more mucus molecules in it. So it can really hold its shape for longer than these other fluids. Okay. The next two I'm going to include together. This blew my mind. Okay. We're being frank. Squirting, female ejaculation. If you were asking me about these concepts a week ago, I would have told you that they're the same thing, that female ejaculation is the same as squirting, and that the words can be used interchangeably. No. Female ejaculate is a different kind of thing and a different process compared to squirting and the fluid that results from squirting. Could have fooled me. Now, maybe a decade ago, I was probably going around telling all my friends that the liquid from squirting was just piss. And then I did some research and I was like, it ain't just piss. They've studied it. They've done chemistry tests on it. It's not just piss. And I still hear this myth going around that it's just urine, and now it just bothers me when I hear that. But then I did some research for today's episode, and boy, oh boy, I learned some things. So we're going to start off with female ejaculate, because these are two different things. So female ejaculation as a concept was first described 2,000 years ago. It's referred to in Taoist texts from ancient China. It's referred to in ancient Indian texts as well. lots of countries were talking about this. The Western world was late to this game, apparently. So, female ejaculate is a milky, thick-ish fluid that is produced by a pair of glands called the Skene's glands, also known as the paraurethral glands. They're on the anterior wall of your vagina, close to the urethra. This is where the female ejaculate is produced, but it is actually released from the urethra itself, which is also where urine comes from the bladder. These Skene glands are what we call analogous to the prostate gland in men. This means that, to put it simply, when you're a fetus in your mother's womb and you're at the stage of development before primary sex characteristics start to be developed, we all have similar groups of cells. For instance, the cells that can turn into a clitoris are also the same cells that can turn into the glands of a penis, if that makes sense. So males have prostates, females have Skene's gland, and they produce a similar fluid. In fact, in female ejaculate, we have found prostatic acid phosphatase. Huh? Excuse me? This is found in semen produced in male bodies because it helps sperm motility, a function of reproduction. This is fascinating that it is also found that we as females produce it ourselves. Now, apparently, with this female ejaculate fluid, it can be released with or without orgasm. We usually only produce up to 1 ml of it, about 1/4 teaspoon. There is no gushing or squirting sensation or phenomena with this kind of fluid. There's no urine in it. And it also has been found to contain fructose, which can act as an energy substrate for sperm cells to help them survive in us. Again, it's all for reproduction, isn't it? It's all for reproduction. Now let's compare that to squirting, which refers to the release of up to 10 ml or more of a fluid that is clearer, that is a diluted kind of urine, but not exactly urine. It contains urine, but there's other things in it too. We know it comes from the bladder and we know it leaves from the urethra. Squirting can occur with or without orgasm, and it is still being debated whether it's just urine or a totally different kind of liquid. There are conflicting studies on that. The consensus, as far as I could find, is that we know there's urine in it, but there's also a lot more in it. It's not just urine. Squirting can happen at the same time as female ejaculate, that milky fluid is released. It is often colourless, odourless, it's more watery compared to that female ejaculate. They have done studies, they've done ultrasounds on women engaged in sexual stimulation. What the findings showed was that you can start arousal with an empty bladder. The bladder will fill during sexual stimulation, and then after this phenomenon of squirting occurred, the bladders are empty again. So the bladder and the urethra obviously has a big involvement, but there's more to it. And this fluid can be produced as a result of arousal and is released as part of arousal. Some women reported that they're more likely to squirt after ovulation and before menstruation, but this has not been confirmed. They haven't done sufficient research on this. That's just kind of anecdotal reports. But how interesting is that? Okay, now let's quickly cover. Actually, while we're on the sex stuff, let's talk about semen. Semen's another thing that you may find coming out of your vagina. Obviously, this will be in the context of recent intercourse. I would say within the last anywhere from immediate past to up to 48 hours prior. And it will usually be thicker. It will be a mix of like that milky white with a little bit of translucency. Obviously, it's going to have a specific smell to it. Maybe a bit more bleachy, maybe a bit more of an alkaline smell compared to our normal smells. Just saying. And lastly, other things we can find occurring at our vulva, coming out of our vaginas, are signs of infection, signs that something's wrong. Maybe we've got an imbalance in our vulvovaginal microbiome. And this is where we want to be looking at colour. If anything is green, grey, yellow or brown, obviously brown spotting or brown bleeding can be normal as part of normal menstruation, but they're things you want to keep an eye on. We also want to be aware of smell. If anything is fishy, which is often associated with bacterial vaginosis, or more of a metallic smell, or just a really strong odour, that's a bit of a red flag. If there's any itching or burning, if the texture and the quantity of the fluid you're seeing is a lot thicker or just a lot more copious, that's something you want to be aware of. I think we've all heard the correlation to cottage cheese that can be related to thrush and candida. I hate that analogy, but I guess it exists for a reason. Obviously, if there's any colour change to the vulva itself, if there's more redness or a change in colour to the skin there, that's something to be aware of. And also if there's a real sudden change, that's also something to keep on the radar. What's normal? 2 to 5 mil of secretions per day is normal. I'm trying not to call it discharge. They're usually going to be clear or white or a cream colour. There's going to be little to no odour. Nothing's going to be super offensive. I think we all have a smell, but it's not going to be super offensive or off-putting. This fluid will be different if you're on any kind of birth control, if you have an IUD, if you're pregnant, if you're breastfeeding, or if you are menopausal or on the perimenopausal journey. And that's a wrap. Let me know if you have any questions. This was super fun and interesting to research and definitely tickles all the right parts of my brain. And I feel like my sex brain and my nerd brain is very satisfied with all this information. So, free cycle tracking guide in the links below. You can also join Corinda's Corner email community for fortnightly updates. Instagram below as well, where I sometimes post if I feel like it. And if you like this episode, please follow on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, subscribe on YouTube, leave me a comment or a like. It helps me share this information with more people who would like to hear it. Thank you for choosing to click on me today. See you in the next one.